Hi guys. For today we're going to talk about film history, the beginnings and then some. So there are three ways of looking into film history. Okay, and for this discussion we're going to look into the three, namely film as art, film as business, and film as technology. So basically, early films is a result of inventors, not artists. So people like Thomas Edison, uh, the Lumiere brothers, and other scientists or inventors actually trailblazed the development of film. So, but before we dwell into that, we have to dwell into the concept of creating a visual image and basically creating an illusion. So the concept of persistence of vision. Peter Mark Roget, he published a paper to the Royal Society about a peculiar optical illusion in 1924, which is often regarded as the origin of the persistence of vision. So it's a theory that was later commonly used to explain the apparent motion in film and animation. Okay? It's the ability of the brain to retain an image a split second longer than the eye actually sees it. If we see 16 individual images in rapid succession, the brain connects them together to make a fluid sequence of movement, hence creating an optical illusion of movement of a subject that you see on screen. I'm going to show you some examples of persistence of vision.
Seré, 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 seré lo que busque y lo que encuentre. Y al salir de mi escondite,
So, this is a very simple toy that actually creates optical illusion. It follows the same concept of um, films. Actually, um, in a way, human beings or human beings are designed to view films because biologically we have this um, capability of connecting several different image when it is sequenced uh, in when we see it sequenced for a split second, so it retains the image, so hence creating the illusion. So this concept or this toy actually emulates what we see in films. So the toy makers used this theory to create handheld machines that were the basis of film development. So imagine a very what do you call this? A very complicated process actually started with something very simple. So one of these toys is what we call the zoetrope. Okay, the zoetrope is a circular drum with slits. It allows movement of darkness and it creates illusion of movement. So it was invented by William Horner in 1834. So in a way, experimentation was going on in many countries at the same time. So we have France, Germany, England, and the US all claim that they invented the movies because in terms of technology, one can trailblaze one country can trailblaze in terms of invention, but uh, sharing the knowledge is not really done traditionally like we do today. But in a way, all these countries, European countries to be particular, actually competed or actually developed their own way in of projecting images on screen. So first we have photography. One of the things that I want you to understand is that when you uh, talk about films, you talk about several different concepts or several different uh, ways of um, first of capturing an image or recording an image. That's one aspect of it. And the next is projecting an image. So how do you show the image that you have captured? Okay, so let's first talk about photography. So we have to have you have to have photography before motion pictures. So these are the important dates in terms of discussing the development of photography technology. Of course, we're not going to dwell into everything, but these are just important dates. So in 1816, Nisim Nipse made the first photographic image. Okay, that's 1816. And in 1839, Louis Daguerre created a clear, sharp image on silver copper plate. So it required 15 minutes of exposure time. During 1816, when Nipsey actually captured an image, so it took him almost the whole day to capture one photographic image. So several decades or a few decades later, Daguerre actually um, made that process more efficient and made that process shorter. So from almost a whole day to 15 minutes of exposure time. And of course, it created a sharper image. Okay. In 1841, only 3 minutes is needed for exposure. So imagine for a whole day to 15 minutes to during 1841, 3 minutes. Okay, so this is the development of science, the invention of more and more tools to use to capture image. Okay, so I want you to look at these two images. So this one is Nipsey's image that he captured again, so almost 12 hours, the whole day. And this is the Gears image where he captured it for 15 minutes. So as you can see, so because of technology, of course, and more efficient way of capturing light, so you have uh, the image capture or image capturing has evolved or has become more efficient. And then there was this guy, Edward Muybridge. So in 1872, he set up 12 cameras along a track, tied strings to the shutters, which were tripped as the horse ran down the track. Okay, so trivia, it's actually a very interesting story where Muybridge and the owner of the track actually made a bet that uh, they wanted to know if the horse actually is there if there is a point where the horse actually do not have a foot on the ground. So all four legs of the horse is up in the air. So one said that's impossible. The other said let's find out. So Muybridge actually did the setup, and then they verified their bet. So hence created by me by accident movement photography. Okay. So this is the actual video footage of the horse uh, that Muybridge captured. So as you can see, Muybridge actually won the bet because there is an instance where the horses or all legs or for all four legs of the horse were actually not on the ground. So hence again creating an illusion that when you put it together sequentially, you create the illusion of movement of the galloping horse. Okay? So, after Muybridge, of course, there are a lot of scientists who actually contributed more and more to the technology, to the development of the technology of image capture. One of which is Etienne Jules Marais. In 1882, he invented the photographic gun. So the lens is muzzled, paper in chamber, and when you pull the trigger, you have 12 rapid exposures. Okay, so when Muybridge did it, he did it with 12 cameras. Now for Mary, he have one camera with a rapid exposure. So this time, 12. Eventually, it became 100 exposures. Okay, so if you look at this, another trivia, if you look at the design of the photographic gun, so it actually looks like a gun, and so it is inferred that this is actually where the terminology shooting comes in or came from. So when we shoot films or when we record videos, we say we are shooting. So it's because of the photographic gun. And then there was George Eastman. He is basically an inventor. He works for Kodak previously. So he developed celluloid film. So he was the one who developed the celluloid film. Now, because originally created for the still camera, it made motion picture actually possible. Because it is flexible enough and it allows light to pass through. Okay, so Eastman actually worked for Thomas Edison as well. Okay, and then there is this guy, William K.L. Dixon or William Dixon. So William Dixon, working for Thomas Edison, begins using the celluloid film. Uh, Okay, so then he, because of developing the celluloid film and creating it, well, developing uses, more and more uses for celluloid film, he created the first film in America. Okay, so it's not Fred Ott's sneeze. Okay, so this is just one of the films that actually was captured because of William K.L. Dixon. Okay, so now motion picture photography is solved because from capturing one single image for almost the whole day to making it more and more efficient, and then making the images sharper, and then now you can take photographs succession rapidly in succession. So now you can record the image. So what's next? So now filmmakers now had to find a way to show their images. Okay. So then came the kinetoscope. So this is the kinetoscope that Thomas Edison and William Dixon actually developed. Okay. October 1889, Dixon shows Edison projection with sound. Okay. The quality is poor. Edison opts for silent individual showings of the film because of the quality. So um, it became something of what they call this, an oddity, or it became something of a sideshow. So basically, William Dixon, invented the kinetoscope with the funding of Thomas Edison. Okay, so this is the kinetoscope. The kinetoscopes were set up in parlors. Okay, so you would see dancing, juggling, clowning, wonders of the world, and a few reenactments. So there are no stories yet. Okay, and what they did was they put up this kinetoscope, so a several different kinetoscope, and it basically looks like an arcade when you where you insert a coin, and when you insert the coin, you basically peep at the peephole where you can see images actually being projected inside the kinetoscope. Okay. Trivia. Those but that kind of technology, or Edison actually set up those parlors in the US. Okay, and he called it Nickelodeon. Okay, so that's the etymology or the source of the word Nickelodeon. It's a place or an arcade where you put a nickel inside the kinetoscope and you can watch images come to life. Okay, so these are the sample um, recordings inside the kinetoscope. So imagine going inside that arcade and then putting on a nickel, and then you see magic inside those kinetoscopes where you can see dancing object or dancing people. Then you can see a lot of other videos as well. So these are individually, the films are individually packed inside the kinetoscope, and they have rows and rows of kinetoscopes inside the Nickelodeon. Okay. So despite Edison's short-sightedness in mass projection, he did leave a mark on motion picture. So this was his contribution. Okay, he contributed the sprocket holes in film. As you can see, this is an example of the sprocket holes in film. Okay, so he also created the first movie studio, which is named Black Maria. So Black Maria was funded by Edison. He started it with $200. Okay. So this is the actual picture of Black Maria. Okay, the film studio, the first film studio in the world. Okay. The camera could only move forward and backward, and the roof opens to allow sunlight. And the building actually rotates to catch the sun's rays. So, and the camera used, of course, electricity. Okay. Now, there are a few of the contributions from America. The history goes back to Europe. Okay. Not just, again, film is not just developed in America, it's also developed in Europe as well. So one country cannot actually claim that they invented movies or they invented films. Okay, it actually is a contribution from several different countries. So now we have projection. So projection was a difficult problem to solve because again, Thomas Edison never wanted to project the image on a big screen. Okay, he just wanted a peephole for the kinetoscope so that people can watch. So that was his shortcoming in terms of his vision for cinema or for film. Okay. Now, projection actually roots back in 1646. This is Father Anastasius Kircher. He actually made a drawing of the box that could reproduce an image through lens. Okay. So this is that drawing. Okay. So if you put an image and then you put that image uh, inside or under a lens for projecting, and then you put a light source behind it so you can see the image being projected. So that was imagined by Father Athanasius Kircher. Okay, so this particular concept is the ancestor of the present day slide projector. Okay, and projection was actually rooted in this concept as well. Now, during the 18th century, showmen travel across Europe showing magic lantern shows. Okay, they use drawn images in the beginning, but eventually they used photographs. Okay, so this is an example of a projection light show. Okay, or a phantasmagoria, so to speak. Okay, phantasmagoria or the magic lantern show, where you see the audience, okay, being amazed of the projection of an image, but it is a combination of a projected image and live performances. Okay, these photo plays drew viewers to a story just as a film does today. Okay, combination of magic lantern shows, live actors, and photography. Uh, some actually lasted up to 2 hours and told melodramatic stories. Okay, so in a way, this proved the potential of projected films. Okay, but of course, there are some key issues that needs to be addressed first, or that needs to be addressed so that it can become a viable business, so to speak. So projection needs a powerful light source to make the image clear. And film has to run smoothly past this light source without tearing. Okay, so this is the Vistascope projector. Okay, so this is in a way how the classical film projector uh, is well, the classic film projector concept is being played. Okay, so as you can see, there are single images, and the images are basically rolled and projected in succession with certain speeds. Okay, so of course that's where the frames per second comes in. Okay, so again, for cinematic, you have 24 frames per second, meaning you have 24 images that is being that is being projected simultaneously for uh, 1 second. Okay, so hence 20 frames per second, or FPS. Okay, so you originally we have 24 and you have 31 and 32, so it depends on the camera that you're holding. Okay, now during the late 19th century, discovered intermittent movement was needed, so similar to the zoetrope slits. So each frame stops briefly in front of the light source. Now, but it ended up being a problem because when you move images, okay, in the light source is very hot, so the film actually burns, or again it tears up. Okay, so hence created the problem of burning film. So basically, that you have to address the cooling issue or the temperature issue. Okay, so even today, this is a problem for films or for um, projections. If the light source becomes too hot, then the film melts, okay, or eventually burns. Okay. So again, going back to the US, you have Thomas Edison. So Edison saw a passing fad in moving images, so he exploited it as a novelty. He did not actually see that this to become a very big industry. Okay. So, but his assistant, so William Kennedy Dixon, had developed a camera that makes short 35-minute films. So again, it's called the kinetoscope. Okay, so this is the very first film that was actually shot and basically a recorded image was created. So it's believed to be the first shot in the United States. It's called Monkey Shines Number One. Is an experimental film made to test the original cylinder format of the kinetoscope. Because before it was cylinder format, now it was now after being the cylinder format, so they decided to uh, latch them into sort of pulleys. Okay, so it was shot by William Dixon and William Hayes for Thomas Edison Labs and shows a blurry figure of white standing in one place making large gestures and is only a few seconds long. Okay, so this is Monkey Shines number one. So as you can see, it's just a white figure of a person that is doing big movements. So this is really, of course, of very poor quality, but the implications of this is very big because now you can capture images and you can capture movement, okay, in those images. Okay. Then going back to Europe, you have the Lumiere brothers. So again, Edison only saw it as a fad. So he did not develop it anymore. So it was these guys. Okay. The thing during 1894, so they bought an Edison kinetoscope and then they made adjustments to it. In fact, they upgraded it. Okay. So then, and then basically within a year, they designed their own machines. They designed their own machine. It's called the cinematography, okay, or cinematograph. Okay. Um, this is where the term cinema actually came from this device. Okay. It is a machine shot the pictures, printed them, and projected them. So it's an all-in-one machine. Okay, the camera was portable and it is basically hand cracked. Okay, so you don't need batteries, you just need elbow grease, so to speak. Okay, December 28, 1895, the first theater opened up for the public. So it was actually not a theater but a basement of a Paris cafe. So the Lumiere show, basically they show workers leaving the Lumiere factory, the arrival of the at Lion, and a baby's meal. So again, there are no stories just yet. So these are just random images or basically rehearsed images that are um, captured and then projected on a silver screen or on a white screen. Okay, so Edison did it as a peephole for the kinetoscope. Now the Lumiere actually created it, upgraded the kinetoscope and made it project images. Okay, so hence the cinematograph. Okay, these are the sample Lumiere films that were projected during that time. So these are the people leaving the Lumiere factory. So as you can see, nothing really is happening. So it's actually very random. They just put a camera in front of the door of the factory and then they recorded people leaving the factory. That's it. Let's forward it a bit. This is the arrival. This time, they put a camera at the port and then they shot people arriving uh, from a riverboat. So, but the implication of this is very interesting, or it's very important, because even though it doesn't actually show us, or this is the feeding baby, it doesn't actually show any story at all. But imagine uh, during the 18th century, or sorry, the 17th century, where entertainment is just reading books, watching plays, and now you see these marvels of science being created, and then people gambling. Okay. Then came this guy, Edwin S. Porter. Okay. If you're a filmmaker, so you have to recognize him, or you have to know who he is, because he is the one who invented editing to tell a story in film. Okay, so his most famous work is The Great Train Robbery. We're going to talk about that a bit later. So Edwin S. Porter once worked under Thomas Edison as a director, made some of the first films to use principles of narrating continuity and development. Okay, among these was The Life of an American Fireman. This, which showed a group of firefighters daring attempts to rescue a mother and a child from a burning house. In the same year, he also made The Great Train Robbery. Okay, this is the granddaddy of Western films. Okay, it is in many ways a prototype for the classical American film or a Western film. Okay, so Edwin T.S. Porter actually had an idea to tape uh, film footage or films together to create a story in it. Okay, hence editing was born. Okay, I'm going to show you a bit of a clip. This is the whole film, but we're not going to show it. I'm going to upload this particular PowerPoint presentation where you can use it to watch the entire film, but we're just going to watch an excerpt of it. So, in a way, Edwin S. Porter actually thought of cutting these films, and the way that he can project it, or the way that he can do that, is by physically cutting the films into those projected image and attaching another film clip to it. So hence, when you say it's a film clip, you actually clip the film, you actually cut the film physically, and then when you put it together, you put clear tape under it, and well, you put clear tape uh, um, to stick the two films together. So hence, when you see, if you look at several images, so you can actually see the tape, or for a split second, see, you see scratches or lines that suggest that the film was taped. So it's basically a cut. So this was one of the first films that have story, or in a way a narrative in it. Again, if you want to watch the whole thing, and I advise you to do so, because, well, for appreciation's sake and for history's sake, if you are a film buff, then these are the films that you really, really need to watch. Okay. Then comes George Méliès. Okay, the shift in consciousness away from films as animated photographs to films as story or narrative began to take place about the turn of the century, and is most evident in the work of the French filmmaker Georges Méliès. So another trivia, if you have seen the Disney film Hugo, directed by Tim Burton. So it is actually a film loosely based on the life of George Méliès. Okay? So one of his iconic films is A Trip to the Moon, or Le Voyage dans la Lune. Okay? By 1902, he had produced the influential 30-scene narrative of A Trip to the Moon. Adapted from the novel by Jules Verne, it was nearly one reel in length, about 825 feet, okay, or 14 minutes. Okay, so again, this is actually a very important film to watch, because this film, imagine, during 1902, he had the audacity of creating fantasy films and creating of and editing it in a way that you can see a visual that is out of this world. Again, we're not going to uh, watch the whole film, but we're going to see excerpts of it. So this is where he made, okay, that film, okay, inside a glass-sided studio. Okay? So the whole film is uploaded in the PowerPoint if you want to watch the whole thing. Disclaimer, this is not the original version. I downloaded the colored version. But it is very interesting also, because he did it in black and white, and they actually tried to color it, and they created a colored image projection by hand painting each frame. Okay, so imagine the tediousness and the attention to detail of George Méliès. I'm sorry. So I want I want to show you a particular scene where, imagine, this is 1902, okay? The trip to the moon, or the travel to the moon, was unimaginable. So it was just basically a work of fiction. Okay, of course we know that mankind actually achieved this already, but imagine how Jules Verne and George Méliès interpreted it. And then they arrived in the moon. They arrived on the moon, and they saw a different planet, or a different civilization altogether. Okay, this is very interesting. So if you want, you can watch the whole thing. Okay. It is available in this PowerPoint. So hence the development now, go moving on, the development of classical Hollywood cinema during 1908 to 1927. So Edison was determined to explain the money-making potential of his company's invention. Okay, so he formed a motion picture patent company. Now, because of this, because during the time he created it in New Jersey, in the East Coast. Okay, so because of this and other factors, film companies that sprouted during the time began to move permanently to California, because he controlled Thomas Edison actually was a very shrewd businessman, and he doesn't want his invention or his patents uh, to go elsewhere. So, and because during that time Thomas Edison was already Thomas Edison, so he had the power to control uh, the patent industry in the East Coast. So that's the reason why filmmakers actually traveled halfway around the country, which is to the other side of the country, which is the West Coast, where California. Okay, hence the birth of Hollywood in Los Angeles, California. From 1904 onwards, narrative became the most prominent type of filmmaking in the commercial industry. Okay. Um, Now, during this time, also, film was also used in Europe for different reasons and for different expressions. Okay. So in Germany during 1919 to 1926, so German theater showed mostly foreign films, but the government started to support its film industry to combat imports and create propaganda films. In 1916, foreign films were banned except Danish ones, and the government backed pro-war films from the United Film. I don't know how to say this. Akitesh. Anyway, now, because filmmaking in Germany was institutionalized or was government funded, the best equipped studios attracted foreign filmmakers. Now, after the war, the adventure serial, so detective, spies, sex exploration, okay, and historical epics were the films or the popular films that are being produced.
Hey everyone, my name is Tyrell and this is Film History Episode 3. Today we're going to be talking about German Expressionism. German Expressionistic cinema was one of the greatest achievements in early cinema history. And up until the end of World War I, art of cinema was fairly simple. In Germany, near the end of the war, because of the conditions, generated up a new creativity in filmmaking. German Expressionistic cinema was born and it took some big steps in the foundation of cinema today. This form of cinema was very successful internationally and opened the world's eyes to new ideas. The conditions for this new creativity did not last, and German Expressionism began to disappear from its original form. But the idea lived on and influenced many, many other genres of cinema that you see today. When we were taking a look at German Expressionism, it was interesting to note the internal problems that Germany had at the time that constituted the birth of German Expressionism. Towards the end of World War I, the German government and military set up the UFA to support local film industry, essentially propaganda. The borders had been closed to imports, so all entertainment had to be made internally. Many film production houses opened, and the industry boomed with strength. But this by itself did not generate the expressionist movement. The people of Germany were hurt. The economy was in depression, the war had been lost, and there was little for people to really be happy about. With what the social state was looking like and the boom of film production, the environment gave rise to a film genre that reflected the mood of people. Through very intricate design as well as subject matter, German Expressionism was born. The German filmmakers began to create sets that were an embodiment of the inner feelings of the characters performing within them. The German Expressionistic film took two major steps forward in production ideology. One was the use of the studio for all aspects of shooting. Two, the pure idea of giving an audience what they wanted beyond the conventional film structure and design. There are a few films in German Expressionism that stand out as prime examples of the genre. Number one, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is notable as the first film that truly exemplifies the genre with many great successes. Dr. Caligari used amazingly distorted set design to make a creative twist. Many other films of the genre went on to success around the world. Other standouts include Nosferatu, the classic vampire film, and Metropolis, with lavish sets and a massive cast. Metropolis is often seen as the film that signaled the end of the genre due to both financial and social changes. Now, there is no agreed upon date in which German Expressionism came to an end. Like many other early genres, it seemed to somewhat fade into the next style of cinema. Check back for part two of German Expressionism. If you like this video, make
Okay. So, supplementary lecture on German Expressionism. So you have the cabinet. These are the sample films. So you have the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, and Metropolis. Then comes the French for French Impressionism and Surrealism. So further the fact that two cinematic movements can coexist at the same time. Okay, so they happened both at the same time in France: French Impressionism and French Surrealism. Okay, gained the name Impressionist because it gives the narrative a great psychological depth and insight to the character. Okay, interest falls not on the external body movements and behaviors, but on the inner action. So, flashbacks are common during the French Impressionism. It insists on registering characters' dreams, memories, and mental states. Okay, so you can see the vision of the character or the imagination of the character. So renders the character's mental states through editing and cinematography. Okay, so one sample of which is Napoleon. It was produced in the 1930s. So I have a trailer of that film. Okay. So after Impressionism, you have Surrealism. Okay. A radical cinematic movement thematically linked to Surrealism in literature and painting. So it sought to visually render the hidden current of the unconscious, deliberate avoidance of rationality. So basically, Surrealist painters like Salvador Dali or Man Ray dabbled into filmmaking as well. But it was Luis Buñuel ultimately became the movement's most successful filmmaker. Okay, so surrealism is can be described as overtly anti-narrative, so it doesn't necessarily have a story to tell. To combat rationality, casuality must be destroyed. So it teases viewers with underlying narrative logic where there really was none. So you think that there is a narrative, but again, you're just going to get lost in it. Okay, discontinuous editing is often utilized to fracture coherence. This movement was brought down by internal dissension among members because, of course, um, basically they are all artists and they have their own vision. So, but basically, the movement was not actually well. It still exists today. Okay, and there are still surrealist elements in a film, but primarily it's added for cinematic value. Okay, so I have a video that explains surrealism a bit.
Since the dawn of cinema, filmmakers have utilized their talents to make moving pieces of art that tell stories. They use creative detail, lighting, and images that help set the tone for what a movie is going to entail. But there is one genre of filmmaking, one style that is mostly overlooked because of its non-linear storytelling technique, and that is surrealism. Surrealism is a 20th century avant garde movement in art and literature that sought to release the creative potential of the unconscious mind, meaning strange images and shapes come together to tell a story, either through books, paintings, or more recently films. Of all the famous surrealist artists, the most famous is Salvador Dali. Dali's paintings are world famous because of the strange, dreamlike images that seem to tell thousands of different stories just by one still image. Sigmund Freud, a psychoanalyst, philosopher, and psychiatrist, frequently studied the nature of dreams and the unconscious mind that liberated imagination. Dali believed in the same principles. Dali once said that the only difference between a madman and me, I am not mad. While Dali was famous for stretching out the imagination through his paintings, once cinema was born, all of these artists were given a new medium to experiment with. Dali made a famous surrealist film called Un Chien Andalou, which in English translates to The Andalusian Dog. The film doesn't really have a plot of any kind, but characters interact with each other and bizarre things happen to them. The most famous scene concerns itself with the main character, as her eyeball is sliced open with a straight razor. Director Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dali later chimed in that most of this film was based on dreams that both men had during their lives. That one shot of the lady's eyeball is one of the most disturbing and analyzed scenes in movie history. Of course, out of all the famous surrealists in cinema, none have been more famous than David Lynch. David Lynch is an American filmmaker who has always gone against the Hollywood grain. His films are purely an art form with multiple layers and meanings. Like paintings, his films can be analyzed and looked at in various ways, and because of the strangeness of his films, most critics regard him as being one of the most creative directors in Hollywood. Most of Lynch's films deal with the surreal style of filmmaking, but four movies stand out as being pure art forms. The first being Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive is one of Lynch's most celebrated films because of its uniqueness and its sheer brilliance on the Hollywood dream. The movie itself is a neo-noirish nightmare on the corruption of Hollywood dreams. It deals with strange characters and oddly put together scenes, as the main character Betty Helms, played by Naomi Watts, who has a lesbian relationship with an amnesiac woman, all set against the backdrop of Hollywood. The film deals with dreams and nightmares, and its conclusion is equally horrifying. Moving on to another David Lynch classic is the film Lost Highway, which stars Bill Pullman as a mechanic who brutally murders his wife. He starts leading a new life, and the movie deals with the neo-noir elements as well as psychological horror. The strange mystery man that appears throughout the film is never explained, but his constant presence in the film is a surreal way of showing the main character's psychological struggle. The film received critical acclaim, but also had its detractors as they felt the film was too confusing, bizarre, and morbid. Of course, one of Lynch's best films and most disturbing films is Blue Velvet. She wore blue velvet, starring Kyle MacLachlan as a man who returns to his hometown only to discover a severed ear in a field, which leads him to an investigation of a nightclub singer and a group of psychopathic criminals who have kidnapped her child. The film's imagery is bizarre, and the main criminal, played by Dennis Hopper, is completely despicable. He sucks on air from a gas mask before he rapes the nightclub singer and the main character watches through the shutters of the closet. The film deals with psychological horror as well as surreal themes and images that confuses the audience. The film earned David Lynch an Academy Award nomination for directing and is widely considered to be one of the best films of the 1980s. Of course, out of all of David Lynch's surreal style films, one stands above all, and that is his very first full length feature, Eraserhead. Eraserhead is a low budget black and white horror film that deals with creatures, dreams, bizarre sexual frustrations, and alien babies. To this day, critics, fans, and myself included have no clue what this film is about. It's just a bunch of characters and images thrown together in a weirdly edited way that tell a story that can take on hundreds of different meanings. The film is frightening, disturbing, and is still the weirdest film that I have ever seen in my career. And for that, it is brilliant. Eraserhead is widely considered to be one of David Lynch's best films, and since its release, it has garnered a massive cult following. From the alien baby to the woman who lives in the apartment radiator, Eraserhead is the ultimate surrealist film and pays homage to the old Salvador Dali films and paintings of its time. Surrealism is fascinating. From the bizarre images to their multiple meanings, film has been a great medium for artists to explore their expressions of dreams, reality, and nightmarish fantasies. And for David Lynch, the most celebrated surrealist filmmaker, he has given us some amazing films to look at, ponder, and be disturbed by. After all, art is merely an expression of the mind. And if you look at the films of David Lynch, you are opening a door into the mind of a genius.
Okay. And then we have silent films. A silent film is a film with no synchronized recorded sound, especially with no spoken dialogue. The silent film era lasted from 1894 to 1929. In silent films, for entertainment, the dialogue is transmitted through muted gestures, mimes, and title cards, which contain a written indication of the plot or a key dialogue. Okay. So one of the most recognizable silent film stars is Charlie Chaplin or Charles Chaplin and his character, the Tramp. So building on traditions forged in the Commedia dell'arte, which he learned in the British music halls. Charles Chaplin brought a traditional theatrical form into an emerging medium and changed both cinema and culture in the process. The birth of modern screen comedy occurred when Chaplin donned his derby hat, affixed his toothbrush mustache, and stepped into the impossibly large shoes for the first time at the Keystone Film Company. The comedies Chaplin made for Keystone chart is rapid evolution from musical sketch comedy artist to master film comedian and director. Okay, so basically, Charlie Chaplin. Some trivia about Charlie Chaplin. He's a very control freak, and he has OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder. He can actually shoot one scene or one sequence of a scene for 50 to 60 times in order to get perfection. So that's how obsessive he was in creating his films. Okay, during the late 1820s, the development of Hollywood cinema came about, 1908 to 1927. So it was the end of the silent era because uh, talkies were introduced. Okay, classical Hollywood cinema was a sophisticated movement, but Hollywood was a standardized system. Okay, Buster, Mary Picton, Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, they actually faded into obscurity when talkies or films that have voices in them, okay, was developed. Okay, So sound in Hollywood. Hollywood started investing in sound technology to widen its powers. So in 1926, the first film with orchestral accompaniment and sound effects on disc, okay, mostly kisses in the film, okay, was Don Juan in 1926. When in 1927, the first synchronized dialogue was produced. It's called Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. Okay, from the sound on music to sound on film. In the 1930s, most theaters were wired already for sound. So we have films that are accompanied by non-synchronous music, and then uh, came an orchestra music inside the film itself for Don Juan, and then a year later you have Al Jolson's Jazz Singer. So it actually set up the audience because it was paraded, or it was primarily produced or marketed as one of the silent films. But then the audience were mesmerized, or the audience were shocked when they heard the characters on the screen talk, or not just talk, they even sang. Okay, so this is a clip of the jazz singer. So again, imagine it was sort of it started as uh silent film. It actually even have text cards on it, or so it's actually very interesting to think about that the first talkie, or the first film with dialogue, is actually a musical. So imagine the reaction of the people from the theater when they see that, again, when they thought that they were watching just a silent film, and then this happened. Moving on. So initial conveniences, or of course, as the technology was introduced early, cameras had to be put on a sound booth. So camera operators can hear dialogue only through the earphones, and camera couldn't even move except for short pans. So mics don't also move, and actors had to stay in a limited area so that the audio can be picked up by a microphone. Okay, so this is an example of what you call this, a sound booth, so that the audio of the films can be recorded. Okay, and then somehow from the booth, then it became, of course, cheaper when it became smaller. So initial solutions, so you have multi-camera setup, booth mounted on wheels, so smaller cases replaced booths eventually. Okay, and mics were mounted on booms. Now sound was added to the Hollywood style. Each sound began to develop a style. So MGM, lavish, high budget production. So Warner Brothers, inexpensive genres like gangsters and musicals, and Universal Studios became the go-to for atmospheric horror films. Okay, musicals became common. Okay, color film stocks became available during the 1930s. So color had to be introduced. So you have moving images now, then you have sound, and then color actually came in. In 1920, okay, they actually did a color sequence or a Technicolor sequence where the film was called The Toll of the Sea, but they only used two colors for combination to create hues, so greenish blue and pink. So during the 1930s, now three primary colors and can now readily produce a larger range of views. Okay, during 1939, the two films actually raced each other to create or to produce films that are colored. So one is Gone with the Wind, and the next is Wizard of Oz. Both released in 1939. Okay, and cinematography has to have evolved as well. Okay, so many stuck to the standard soft focus style during the 1920s to the 1930s. Okay, so you have gauzy fabrics, soft lenses. In 1930s, deep focus style became the trend. So it was actually started by Citizen Kane. Okay, directed by Orson Welles. Okay, matte work, rear production projection eliminate gauzy effect, which gives hard edge appearances where deep focus actually came in. Okay, Citizen Kane in 1941, again directed by Orson Welles. Greg Toland is the DOP, where they created the films actually was a success technically in director of photography or in cinematography, basically because of how deep the focus was, where uh, the background was also sharply focused, even uh, if the foreground or even if the subject is focused as well. So hence deep focus was created. Okay, classical Hollywood consistently modified itself throughout the years, but it never really radically changed. Okay, so then came the rise of the new Hollywood. Okay, now rise of movie brats or directors who went to film schools, mastered techniques, and studied film history and aesthetics, loved and knew films, actually came into fruition. So produced personal, highly self-conscious films. So films of new Hollywoods were based on old Hollywood, but again, it's now technically better because students, they were film students, they actually studied film already, the history of it, the technicalities of it, and then the technology of it. Okay, so it became a collection of isms, so to speak, of surrealisms, of realisms, impressionism, etc., so that hence they created very, very interesting films that were developed during the 1960s to the 1970s. Okay, so directors like George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, Brian De Palma, Peter Bogdanovich, Robert Altman, Woody Allen, and Steven Spielberg actually came about. So this is where they created their very best work during the time. Okay, films like American Graffiti, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, The Godfather, Dress to Kill, Nashville, Annie Hall, Bonnie and Clyde, and The Graduate came about. Okay, so Jaws and Star Wars marked the beginning of the end. So the entry of the blockbuster era, where they have big set pieces, they have a very relatable stories and very high budget films. Okay, with costumes and anime and animatronics, etc. Okay, so it was called the blockbuster era, where a lot of people actually watch it because, well, it's now the blockbuster. The terminology blockbuster came about because of the lines of people in movie theaters. They expanded a few blocks. So that's why it's called blockbuster. So the line is so long that it spanned through a couple of blocks. So it's not just one block that has a line. So it's spread throughout. So it's called blockbuster. Okay. During the 1980s, new Hollywood came about. So Tim Burton, George Zemeckis, Spielberg, again, European filmmakers making it big in Hollywood also, like Tony and Ridley Scott, si Peter Weir, Paul Van Hoven, Wolfgang Peterson. So independent filmmakers are having their own spotlight in Hollywood. Directors like David Lynch, Spike Lee, John Singleton were among them. Okay, now the style during the 1970s to the 90s was not really very, there is no coherent film movement to it. It depends on the auteur or the director on which film style he wants to put in his creation. Okay, so of course there were continuity editing, new or revised visual techniques for storytelling. So motion control and later on special effects technology were now introduced. During the 1980s to the 1990s, independent directors, okay, explored other ways of telling the story visually. So it's not just Hollywood blockbusters anymore. Okay, uh, there are films that can be watched or that can be produced, okay, not in Hollywood, but in a way can be starred on by Hollywood stars. Okay, so time lapses, time jumps, flashbacks were big during this time. Okay, distribution companies like Miramax and October Films, which acquired independent films. So Sundance Film Festival was created by Kevin Smith, Robert Rodriguez, and David O. Russell. Okay, so big budget films of independent filmmakers conveyed an experimental approach. Okay, so even though they are big budget, they seem to have an experimental approach because of the filmmaker's way of telling a story. Uh, Films like Dogma, Pulp Fiction, Sixth Sense, Fight Club, Being John Malkovich, and even The Matrix. And now, films are continually evolving from standard format to HD to now 4K. Okay? Uh, Films from analog is being digital now for better storage and, of course, for better distribution. Films are becoming more and more accessible also. They are not confined in movie theaters anymore. Streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and HBO Go are becoming more and more popular, that some studios opted to release big budget films directly to those streaming services. Okay, so in a way, technology has helped in democratizing filmmaking as well. So even now, there are a lot of students, there are a lot of people who can purchase a camera and has access to a laptop that can actually do editing. So in a way, film, just like photography, has become more accessible. So it's actually a good thing because, of course, there are a lot of talents that are scattered everywhere. Okay, and lastly, film is still the second largest industry in the world. Okay, so the film industry is not going to die anytime soon. It is evolving. Okay, so that ends my lecture about film history. I hope you learned something. Apologies for the lengthy video, but it's very difficult to actually cut parts of history. So thank you very much for watching, and please keep safe.